This took me over a decade to learn, and I'm going to teach it to you in less time than it takes to watch a Seinfeld episode. So many golfers are making the game harder for themselves by playing the wrong equipment. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to look past the marketing claims and become a better consumer by learning about club fitting and what makes golf equipment perform differently for each player. Hi, my name is Jon Sherman. I'm the author of the best-selling book, The 4 Foundations of Golf, co-host of the Sweet Spot podcast, and PGA Tour coach. But most importantly, I'm a golfer just like you. For the past 10 years, I've been running a ton of different equipment tests, and I've been fortunate enough to learn from one of the best club fitters in the entire industry. It's really opened up my eyes on how important fitting is for players who really want to get better. But before we get into what makes golf equipment perform differently, let's go into a common marketing tactic and why you should look past it. Don't get me wrong, major OEMs are making incredible golf clubs, but they're in an absolutely fierce battle for your money. One of the main tactics they use is what I call player validation, and I just want to explain quickly why that's absolutely meaningless in your purchase decisions. For decades, the major manufacturers have been using tour validation to sell their products. Now, I understand that people love seeing pictures of what's in the bag for Rory McIlroy and Scottie Scheffler, but what they're playing is absolutely meaningless to you. In other words, their needs for clubs are much different than yours. So it really makes no sense to take cues from the best players in the world on what clubs you should be purchasing. And the next step of this that has been happening a lot recently is what I would call creator validation. You're seeing more and more personalities on YouTube becoming part owners of golf club companies and signing big deals with companies like Titleist. And don't get me wrong, I think this is a really smart move by the manufacturers, and I don't blame the creators at all. They give away a ton of great free content, and they need a way to partner with some companies in the industry that are good. Now, if you want to support some of these creators by buying these products, I totally get that. But how they deliver the golf club and how those clubs fit them are much different than you watching this video. The third one is probably the most important, and this is product reviews. So if you're on YouTube looking for the latest driver releases or irons, you're likely going to come across a ton of videos from people who are doing tests on them. They're comparing them to their current irons on a launch monitor and showing you the differences. I hate to be negative, but a review from a singular golfer is completely irrelevant to you, and I'll share a quick story about how this happened to me. So back in 2017, Callaway released their jailbreak technology. Players were testing the club and gaining 20, 30 yards, and they weren't making this up. They were showing the results on a launch monitor. It was a really good driver. I got swept up in the excitement and I put the club in my bag. But here's what happened. On my good shots, I was hitting really nice drives, but when I missed the center of the face, the ball was going absolutely nowhere, and it was driving me insane. I wanted this driver to work for me, but it revealed a really important part of club fitting that I will get into in this video. It's not about how the golf ball performs on your great swings where you're striking the center of the face. It's what happens when you miss the center of the face. So when I took the driver and tested it with Woody Lashin at Pete's Golf, what we found was that my spin rate on off-center hits was dropping all the way down to 1100 or 1200 RPMs. It's like a duck falling out of the sky. So I was losing upwards of 30 and 40 yards on these miss hits, and it just wasn't the right driver for me. It was lowering the spin rate, which is what a lot of golfers need. So at that time, the Titleist driver, which most people didn't like because it spun too much, was actually the right driver for me. So this is something you should keep in mind when you're seeing all the advertisements and product reviews. I understand some people want to be loyal to brands that they're fans of, like Titleist, Callaway, or Ping, but brand loyalty might be holding you back. I've had as many as 5 or 6 different OEMs in my golf bag because not every manufacturer has the right solution for your impact tendencies. I have a TaylorMade 5-wood that's really good for me. It launches it high with more spin. It took me a really long time to find that club, and a lot of companies just didn't make one that was right for me. And I can guarantee you that's going to be the case for your golf game too. Now let's move on to some club fitting knowledge so I can educate you on how different clubs in your bag will perform differently based on your swing tendencies. I've been doing tests with Woody Lashin from Pete's Golf for almost 10 years now. Their whole staff is one of the best in the business. They've been recognized as one of the best fitters in the industry for over 4 decades now. We've done a ton of podcast episodes on the Sweet Spot, so if you want to nerd out on equipment, you can check out our equipment education series with Woody Lashin. There's like 8 episodes and upwards of 20 hours of content where we go really deep into these topics. But in this video, I'll kind of give you a greatest hits of all of that. So I absolutely want to plug Pete's Golf. I'll put the link in the description. They're located just out of New York City, and I can tell you we've had hundreds of people who have listened to the podcast episodes that have traveled from around the world to get fit by them. So again, I just want to thank Woody and his staff for helping me understand how all of this works. I used to be very skeptical of club fitting, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that all the different clubs in my bag have helped me win golf tournaments and hit shots that I wouldn't be capable of with the wrong clubs. And I think the biggest myth in club fitting is that it's only for better players. And what I've found is it's actually the opposite. If you gave a skilled ball striker the wrong golf club, they're gonna make some adjustments during their golf swing at impact to hit more functional golf shots. But the beginner to intermediate player doesn't have that skill. And if you put the wrong shaft or driver head or lie angle on their irons that isn't right for them, they're gonna struggle even more. So the main point I want to try and make to people is that this game is hard enough and you don't want to play with one hand behind your back with the wrong golf clubs. And that's exactly why buying off the rack can be a huge mistake for so many players. When you get fit properly for clubs and you do it once and get it right the first time, they can last you so long. Driver technology isn't going to change that much between 5 or 7 years, so you can keep your driver in the shaft for a really long time. I've had the same set of irons for almost 8 years before I recently changed it out. The only club in your bag that actually needs to be changed is your wedges, which I'll explain a little bit later in the video. So I think you could actually save more money by getting it done right rather than keep buying new clubs every few years based on the marketing claims you're seeing. All right, so let's talk about arguably the most important club in the bag for marketing claims and I believe scoring, your driver. So one thing that I think golfers don't understand is they think that loft and heads are something that's standard in the golf industry. And I'll give a quick test that I did to explain why this isn't the truth. A few years back, I took a bunch of driver heads from TaylorMade, Callaway, Titleist, and we all set them to 9 degrees. And I hit a bunch of shots and we saw wildly different results. So with driver, we're looking to maximize distance and of course tighten your dispersion as much as possible. Although these drivers were all set to 9 degrees, I was seeing 10, 20, even 30 yards of distance changes between the clubs. It's because of the most important design feature that you want to get right, and that's called center of gravity. Every manufacturer has different preferences on where they put the center of gravity in each club. And this has a massive influence on ball flight. And again, this translates to how far the golf ball is going to go and what happens on your miss hits. So the two things you really want to get right with your driver are making sure you're getting fit with the right center of gravity that accommodates how you deliver the club head, and more importantly, the right loft setting. A lot of golfers think lower loft will get more distance. If anything, more golfers need more loft. You might hit down on your driver a bit versus someone who hits up on it. Swing speed plays a role, and more importantly, when you miss the center of the face, what are your strike tendencies? Center of gravity can match up with all of these things and give you a driver that absolutely can add 20 or 30 yards of distance if you get it right. Now, the last thing that's really important about driver fittings is something called moment of inertia. You've probably heard this term. Long story short, it's how much forgiveness is built into the driver. So when you miss the center of the face, the golf club is going to twist open or close based on whether you strike it more towards the toe or the heel. This is called gear effect. Some have more MOI built in them for players who need that assistance on off-center strikes. So when you miss the center of the face, you won't lose as much ball speed and the ball will actually go a little bit straighter because it will fight against gear effect. But again, there's trade-offs with MOI. If it's way too high for you, it might cause very high spin rates. For better players, they don't need as much MOI because they're not missing the center of the face as much. So this is another thing that you want to get right in your driver fitting to make sure that if you're a toe striker or a heel striker, you're giving yourself the best chance to keep the ball in play and travel far enough to hit functional drives. There's no standards with drivers. This is going to be a reoccurring theme as I move through each topic. And if you get the right driver in your hands, it absolutely can go farther and straighter. I've seen the evidence in my own game and definitely with tons of other golfers who've been fit. So let's move on to perhaps I think the most misunderstood topic in club fitting, and that is shafts. One thing I've learned about that industry is it's pretty much the wild, wild west. People are slapping on paint jobs into New Year's models from last year's, and it's kind of a dirty secret of the golf industry that most players don't know about. So you might buy a shaft that says it's regular flex, but it actually might not be regular. It could be the equivalent to another company's stiff. But really experienced club fitters will test all of these shafts and they know in the back of their head how they perform and how it matches up to a golfer's swing. So here's a few things that you should understand. You can think of shafts like the transmission of the car. The club head is more of the engine. That's the more important part that you want to get right. But if you don't have the right transmission, then the car can't perform as well as it should. So the whole point of matching up the right right shaft to your swing profile and the club head you've chosen, it's to help you access the center of the face more often and let the club do what it's designed to do, which will improve your launch conditions. I felt it in my own swing where I've had the wrong weight on an iron shaft or the wrong flex on a driver shaft. It messes with the timing of my swing, and again, I can't access the center of the face more often, which is literally one of the main goals of golf. So getting back to stiffness, this is probably the most important topic for golfers, and just understand that there are no standards when it comes to this. And the shaft itself doesn't really know how fast you're swinging the club. A lot of people think that you choose a shaft based on your swing speed. Yes, that is one element of it. It's more of the load that you're applying to the shaft. I'll give a quick example of how this works. So Woody Lashin from Pete's Golf always told me this story of Nick Price and Fred Couples to explain why swing speed is not the only determining factor of what shaft you're going to choose. So Nick Price, if you remember, had a lightning quick golf swing. He was done with this entire swing when other players hadn't even got to the top of their swing. So for Nick, because he had such a lightning quick tempo and again applying a ton of load to the shaft, he couldn't find one that was stiff enough for him. Whereas Fred Couples had this smooth, rhythmic golf swing. It didn't look like he was swinging fast, but he was one of the longest hitters in his day. But because of that tempo, and he didn't apply as much load to the shaft and transition as Nick, he didn't require as stiff as a profile. The same thing goes with the profile of your shaft. Golfers who apply a late load to their swing might need a stiffer tip, while golfers who early extend, which is a really common problem, might need a softer profile. Another important thing to get right in your driver, iron, or wedge shaft is the weight. Shafts can be anywhere from 40 to 135 grams. Now, generally speaking, a slower swing speed will want a lighter shaft, but there are tour players who swing at over 120 miles an hour who actually sometimes like lighter shafts, and you won't know until you test. Last but not least, there's stock shafts and premium shafts. What's the difference? A lot of it is quality control. If you're buying a premium shaft that comes out from some of the Japanese manufacturers, these have really tight tolerances with how they perform, they're handmade, and a fitter has confidence that what they order is what they're gonna get. There's certain companies who are offering stock shafts where you might order the regular flex, and again, if their quality assurance is not as tight, you might not get the same exact shaft that you had hoped for. That doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't buy stock shafts. There absolutely could be the right answer for you. You don't always have to spend more money to get the right shaft for your game. But again, this is the benefit of working with a knowledgeable club fitter, and especially an honest one who's not just gonna sell you an $800 shaft because it makes them more money. And last thing I'll leave you with is do not make purchasing decisions based on the paint job. They all know that golfers love the paint job and they'll change designs every year. I've even heard stories where they took last year's model and just slapped a fresh new paint job on it and said it was new. But getting the right shaft will help you access the center of the face more often, and plenty of the other questions that you get asked in the impact interval. Now let's move on to irons. I can make a strong case that this is the most important fitting because we now know that approach play is the most important part of golf for scoring. It's where players separate the most. And if you have the wrong irons for your game, you can't control distance effectively, so your north to south dispersion might be too wide. Your left to right dispersion might be wider if you don't have the right lie angle or club head design. So getting the right irons for your swing is incredibly important for your scoring potential. And the one thing that the golf industry has been pushing the last 10 years is adding more distance to your irons. Golfers get very excited when they get a 7-iron in their hand and they see it go 180 yards on a launch monitor and they want to buy that one. Now, I'm not saying getting more distance isn't worth pursuing. Better iron play is more about distance control. You want to make sure that the iron you're choosing is hitting your number more often and that north-south dispersion isn't too wide. For example, I was recently testing a set of irons that I thought I liked, and I was hitting my numbers really well when I made good contact, but I noticed when I mishit them, I lost over 20 yards of distance, which wasn't acceptable to me. My current set was only going to lose about 10 or 15 yards. And that's the number one problem with iron play. Golfers are not getting the ball to the green. Pursuing distance control is one of the most important things to get right in your club head design. And getting back to the driver example, the center of gravity is going to have a huge influence on how that works. And just know that static loft is just a starting point. I could take 3 irons that have the same loft on them, and based on the center of gravity design, one's going to launch higher with more spin and even more ball speed. One could launch lower with less spin, and one could go in between those two. And again, the center of gravity is going to have the most influence on how the golf golf ball initially comes off the face. So a lot of golfers with slower swing speeds will need a lower center of gravity to get the ball in the air quickly, whereas a more advanced golfer can get away with a center of gravity that's a little bit higher on the face that'll give them more distance control. There's so many options to choose from, and sometimes you might need that game improvement iron or a player's iron, but you won't know until you test it and make sure that you're actually seeing meaningful benefits in your ball flight. Another thing that's crucial with irons is your lie angle. I would argue that this is one of the most important things to get right as well. So my swing path used to be very into out and my toe was very upright at impact. And what that does is it actually made me miss the ball more left. As loft increases, lie angle has more influence on where the ball is going to take off directionally. So if you have a toe that's way up in the air with a right-handed golfer, you might start missing targets more left, and vice versa if the club head was too flat. So this becomes more important with missing greens left to right. And I just had my lie angle adjusted again because I changed how I delivered the club head. My toe was actually digging into the turf and I was missing my targets more to the right. And we adjusted it by 1.5 degrees and it straightened out my ball flight. So again, these are little tweaks you can make to your clubs that can help you hit more greens and lower your scores. Now let's move on to wedges. I want to give you a few basic things that you want to get right. So the first part about a good wedge fitting is loft gapping. As I said earlier, irons are going farther than ever with the advancements we've had in technology. So oftentimes golfers will get stuck between their pitching wedge and perhaps their sand wedge and have this enormous gap between those clubs. So a gap wedge might fill that for you. So the first thing you want to get right is making sure that you don't have these massive gaps in distance control. I'd say more than 15 yards is a bit too much. So you'll want to arrive at a different loft makeup of your set. For example, for me, I have 51, 56, and 60-degree wedges that fit in nicely for my distance control profile. Another thing that you want with wedges is a variety of sole designs. And this is so important because it's based on the type of shots that you like to hit around the course. Do you like to open the face up more? Do you like to kind of dig into the turf and hit low runners? So based on the types of shots that you hit, it will influence the different sole designs that you have in your wedge set. Another thing to take into consideration are the turf conditions you're playing in. Do you play on really firm, sandy turf versus players who might play in softer conditions? This can absolutely affect the type of sole design you want. So a good rule of thumb is that you want variety. So my 56-degree wedge has a very wide sole and a ton of bounce built into it. Don't always judge a wedge by the amount of bounce that it has into it. That's not the only factor in how much relief that's built into it. How wide and the design of the sole will also play a role in how much effective bounce is being used. So when I have a shot that requires more relief, let's say I'm buried in the rough a bit more or in a bunker, I'm going to use that club that has more relief built into it. Whereas my 60-degree wedge has less bounce and I can use that for more shots off of tighter lies where I want to dig a bit more. So this is all player dependent. Some people need more relief built into it like I do because I lean the shaft and I'm not exposing as much bounce, where other people will release a bit earlier in their swing and not shaft lean as much and they don't need as much bounce. Last but not least, lie angle becomes even more critical because as I said earlier, as loft increases, how your club is interacting with the turf, again, if the toe is up in the air or digging into the turf, will have a huge influence on the start direction of your shots. So if I have a full swing shot with my 56 degree and I don't have the right lie angle, I might miss my target more to the left or right, and I'm making golf harder for myself. And lie angle is also important for turf interaction, which is one of the most important pieces of better wedge play. So with wedges, we want the right lofts for distance gapping. We want variety of sole designs that match up with the types of shots we like to play and turf conditions. We want to get the lie angle dialed in properly. And of course, shafts will be important too. Do you have the right weight on your shaft and profile for the types of shots you're hitting with your wedges? This all comes together and helps give you a better chance of hitting more functional shots on the golf course. One last thing I'll say about wedges is that they do not last forever. It's the only club in your bag that actually wears out. And a great analogy that Woody Lashing gave me was that think of it like the treads on a tire when you're driving. If you have worn out treads and you're on a dry road, the car is going to be fine. But if you start introducing wet or snowy or icy conditions, the car is gonna skid more. And it's the same thing with your wedges. If you have a beat up wedge with signs of wear on the face, you'll still hit shots that are fine off of tight lies on the fairway, but you'll struggle to spin it more out of the rough. So I know everyone doesn't have unlimited budgets, but that's the only club in your bag that you might have to switch out every year or two. And if you're seeing visible signs of wear on the club face, that's probably an indication that it's time to switch them out. But you don't have to worry about your driver and your irons or your putter as much. Those can last for years. So those are some basics on driver, iron, and wedge fittings. Again, you can go much deeper into those topics if you check out our podcast, The Sweet Spot. I'll link to it in the description. I know I'm gonna get a ton of questions in the comments, so I'll try and answer a few that always come up. The first is adjustability. Whether you're buying a driver, fairway wood, or hybrids, there's now more adjustability options than ever with the loft, lie angle, and moving the center of gravity around. I just saw a commercial from Cobra yesterday saying their new driver has 36 options. Now, this is a great thing for club fitters because they know what to do with this. But if you're buying that club off the rack and tinkering around with all the settings, I would highly encourage you not to do that. If you're gonna get fit, let them do it right the first time and set the loft and the center of gravity and lie angle, and then just forget it. Don't tinker around with it because I think you're gonna cause more harm than good. Another question that comes up is when you should get fit. And there's no right answer to this, but I'll give you some general rules of thumb. So a beginner golfer who's just learning the game, I would say is not a good candidate for club fitting because their swing is gonna be changing. So they should wait to get fit. And that's a good suggestion for most golfers. If you're at a point where you think your swing is mostly stable and you're not going to introduce any major changes, like how fast you're swinging or your club path and other factors like that, then yes, you could get fit. But if you're undertaking a series of lessons and going through a major swing overhaul, it's a better idea to wait because your needs for your irons, let's say your lie angle, center of gravity, or the loft on your driver, or the shaft could absolutely change. So there's not 100% right time to get fit because our golf swing does change quite a bit. But if you feel like you're in a more stable place, then you can do it. Another question I always get that I don't have the best answer to is how to find club fitters. I know I've got people watching this video from all different parts of the world. I appreciate you tuning in and your attention span if you made it this far, but I don't know the level of club fitters that are around you. If you lived in the Northeast, I would send you to Pete's Golf. If you lived in California, there's plenty of reputable fitters there. Like any other industry, there's bad, good, and best. I think a good rule of thumb is going with an independent fitter who has a really good track record locally. I'm not against the national chains. They definitely have good fitters at each location, but you're not sure what you're getting. The best advice I could give you is just go by word of mouth in the local golf community. And if it really is that important to you, it might be worth traveling to someone. As I said, if you get it done right the first time, it could last you 5, 7, or even 10 years. You don't need to upgrade equipment every few years. The technology doesn't change that much. And I realize not everyone has the budget for this. You can still play great golf with the wrong clubs. I'm really intending this more for the hardcore golfer who's really into equipment and really into game improvement. If you want your best opportunity and you have some money to invest, then I think this is the way to go. But I can tell you that improving your skill and your golf swing is going to drive your performance the most. Golf clubs are there to enhance that and make the game a little bit easier. And the last word of warning I'll give you, if you do see a club fitter, just beware of being sold and not fit. If they come at you with the $800 aftermarket shaft with the driver immediately, I'd be a little wary of that location. It's not to say that that might not be the right shaft for you, but if they keep pushing the more expensive stuff, that's not always going to be the right solution for your game. This is definitely one of my longer videos, so I thank you for making it this far. If you are an equipment nerd and you want to learn more about this, definitely check out our Sweet Spot episodes with Woody Lashin, and you can go check out their website, Pete's Golf. They've got some great information on there. And again, I thank them and their staff for teaching me a lot of this and other people in the industry I've learned from. And don't miss my other video where I show you 7 signs that you're getting better at golf, even if your scores aren't showing it.